Hello everyone, welcome to another video for ChessGoals YouTube channel. James here, back recording some additional content for our Nimzo-Indian course. Firstly, I just want to thank the community for your support and feedback on the course, which was overwhelmingly positive. First course I've worked on and published, and so for it to be so well received really does mean the world to me. Today, we're looking at some additional lines you may want to try in the 4 Bishop G5 Leningrad variation. So let's put that on the board. So D4, Knight F6, C4, E6, Knight C3, offering a Nimzo-Indian, Bishop B4, going into the Nimzo-Indian, and now this move for Bishop G5. In the course, we recommend and go into quite a bit of detail on the really the best move in the position, which is for C5, but it's very theoretical and does require quite a bit of understanding of the resulting positions. It is absolutely the best move, with black getting a comfortable advantage in the lines recommended in the course, but what I find is my memory is not so great, and I can't always remember all of my preparation. So I was doing some snooping to see if there was anything simpler I might be able to play, and I think I've stumbled on a recommendation I've not seen elsewhere that not only ties in nicely with the rest of the ChessGoals repertoire recommendations, but also contains a little bit of venom, and that move is for B6. So what are we trying to do with 4B6? Well, very often we're going to transpose into other variations when white might play a move like Queen C2 or Knight F3, and we play a few more moves and we end up in a different course chapter where we have the very familiar Queen's Indian pawn structure with E6, D6, B6 and the bishop on B7. And if we get that transposition, which is very common, we really cut down on the amount of theory we need to learn, but we also have the benefit of getting comfortable and familiar positions where we know all of the plans. Now, if white doesn't go along with that transposition, we'll cover those options today in more detail. After investigating, I have found black gets at least a playable position, but often quite an enjoyable advantage. So let's begin. After 4b6, the most common move is 5e3, when we can play h6. Now, it's important to start with h6 because we want to know, are they keeping the bishop, dropping back, or are they taking the bishop? So we'll look at both options. After 6 bishop h4, we can play bishop b7, putting the bishop on the best diagonal and passing the move to white. Right now the position is already comfortable. And after a natural move like knight f3, we can execute our plan, transposing to a different chapter with g5, bishop g3, knight e4, at which point not only have we fully equalized, we've transposed to the 4 knight f3 chapter, covered in great detail in the course, and this is a very promising position for black, where black scores really well. So we already have our first transposition. So going back to move 6, where we looked at 6 bishop h4, what if instead, after h6, they continue with a move that takes us out of our existing repertoire with bishop takes f6. Well, in this case, not after queen takes f6, not only have we already got the bishop pair, but we've got a lead in development. White has not played e4 in a single move, so black should be at least already equal. Play may continue with moves like knight f3, and here I recommend the computer-approved bishop takes c3 check, inflicting the doubled pawns. We want to play, if you're going to take on c3, it makes sense to play this now before they could play queen c2 or rook c1 on the next move. Now, If instead of knight f3 they did play queen c2 or rook c1, I would just recommend playing bishop b7, and then after they play a3, then you can take on c3. You won't get the doubled pawns, but you do get a tempo back, and you don't have to fight against any bishop pairs either. So now b takes c3, bishop b7. So when the knight is already on f3, we're not going to have time to execute the bishop a6, knight c6, knight a5 plan. So we just want to put our pieces on their traditional best squares, which will be bishop b7 and knight d7 after we've played d6. Bishop e2, a little bit better than bishop d3 here because it reinforces this knight, which we were threatening to potentially take after bishop d3. Castles, castles, and now d6. And in this position, we already have about a 0.4 of a pawn advantage as black immediately out of the opening. It's based on the more active bishop. It's based on the healthier pawn structure. And we can simply continue with moves like knight d7, queen e7, e5, and then maybe even f5 as well to take more space. White is not going to have a kingside attack, which is normally how they would compensate for these doubled pawns. So just a comfortable opening advantage for black right away. So if we go back, that was 5e3, which is the most common response you'll see according to the club database, but we can look at some other responses as well. Here, let's look at a move like knight f3, for example. Well, very quickly, this will transpose into a 4 knight f3 Nimzo-Indian. So bishop b7, we're just waiting for them to play e3. e3 is by far the most move. Queen c2 is also possible. That will also transpose. h6, asking the bishop what it wants to do. Now we've already seen a position like this. If they take bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, will transpose to what we just looked at. So bishop h4, it's the most popular move. g5 again, bishop g3, knight e4. And we've seen this pattern once already. We've transposed back into that 4 knight f3 Nimzo-Indian. So you're starting to see what we're trying to achieve here with the move 4b6. We're trying to consistently get that transposition to a 4 knight f3 Nimzo-Indian, or a position where white is forced to give up the bishop pair early and allow us to double their pawns. It's not a position covered in the course, but it's a very simple, very straightforward strategic position to play. So 4b6. What else can they play? Well, a critical try. I'll look at another non-critical try. So queen c2. How do you transpose there? Bishop b7, fighting for that e4 square, preventing them from playing e4 on the next move. Knight f3 is the most common move in the database. h6. We know where bishop takes f6 goes. So bishop h4. g5, you guessed it, bishop g3, and knight e4. And again, we've transposed to that 4 knight f3 Nimzo. So the vast majority of the time, your opponent is going to transpose to other material you already know, they may not know. That's already a success as far as I'm concerned, greatly cutting down on the amount of theory you need to learn. So what if they don't transpose? What if white plays very ambitiously? Well, it's a good question. It's a critical question, so let's have a look. I think the first critical try must be e4. With the move b6, we didn't prevent white from playing e4, so they can play e4. We need a good response. So h6, this grabs the bishop pair by force, because if they drop back with bishop h4, we can play g5, and then after bishop g3, we're just taking this pawn. So obviously they can't play that. So bishop takes, queen takes. I would point out we already have the bishop pair. The most common move here is knight f3. We can again play bishop takes on c3 before rook c1 or queen c2. B takes c3, d6. d6 now because white has already established this wall of pawns and we don't want them pushing e5 too easily. So d6 is fighting for that e5 square. Bishop d3. Now bishop b7. Again, with the knight already on f3, we just don't have time for bishop a6, knight c6, knight a5. That's fine. We can come after these weak pawns later. They're going to be there for the rest of the game. Castles, knight d7, still fighting for e5. Rook e1. White wants to push e5 themselves and open up this bishop, open up this diagonal to attack our king. And thankfully, we are just in time to play e5 ourselves, blockading the e4 square. Most commonly, white plays d5 here, letting us occupy c5 with a knight. They also sometimes take when we can take back with a pawn and then put the knight on c5 as well. So very promising positions. If they do push d5, you can redistribute this bishop either to c8 or a6. And it ends up being much better than its counterpart on d3. If we go back to 7 knight f3, going back slightly further, possible is also e5 right away. It's a little bit more challenging. Here we can just play queen e7. From e7, the queen supports both d6 and c5. Now that the pawns in the middle are fixed, we're going to be able to play pawn breaks against them and break down this pawn center that white has built. Now knight f3, chop, taking away the knight and doubling the pawns. Pawn takes back, of course. d6, preparing to break in the middle. We're still fighting for that e5 square. Bishop d3, bishop b7. We want to play this now, or they can play bishop e4, which is a little bit awkward. Castles and knight d7, and we've developed all of our minor pieces. We've got good control in the middle, and we're ready to take on e5. It's a balanced position. White does have slightly more space. They also have the doubled pawns. With two sets of minor pieces already exchanged, the position is about even, as the space advantage is not so valuable, but this is about as good as white can do out of this opening. Now if we go back slightly, instead of knight f3, which is a very natural move, they can try queen f3 with an attack on our rook in the corner. Here it's very aggressive, but we have a very simple solution. So knight c6, developing a piece. They usually long castle. Bishop b7. Now we can look forward to a discovered attack on the queen in the future. Knight b5, going after our c7 pawn, is the most common move. And here, this is just a good one to know. You don't need to do a lot of memorization in my courses, but we do sometimes include these, let's say, club mistakes that you can punish. We can actually just ignore the threat with short castles exclam. And I say in the notes, provocative play, daring white to take the pawn. So if they do take, knight takes, we have the amazing move rook a c8, and we are just completely lined up with this very weak king. We have a significant lead in development, and the pawn does not matter too much in this opposite side castling position. White's going to come under a very fierce attack. Now instead of knight takes, they might instead try a3, when you can play a6, knight c3, and then b takes on c3. It doesn't really matter how they recapture. Again, with a very good position, we can look to put the rook opposite the king, play knight a5, maybe break with b5. So a very comfortable position for black. Certainly nothing to be concerned with. So as you can see, the positions after e4 equal at best, with best play for white, but I think a little bit more pleasant to play for black. Certainly easy for white to go wrong. Now the last critical try, and I think the most critical try, and the line that I needed to be sure worked for black before I would ever recommend this to you, is the move f3. Intending just to play e4, build this huge pawn center, bang, 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 and also block out our bishop on b7. So if f3 is good, this whole system would not work. So I say in the notes, this is rare, but a critical continuation. here we have the very surprising move bishop e7, and tactically this actually prevents e4. So if e4, which is played more than 3/4 of the time, we have the very nice move knight takes e4. And here we've got a triple attack on the bishop. We're also attacking the knight. So if they were to play a move like f takes, we just grab the bishop, we're a pawn up with the bishop pair. If they try knight takes, we can still take the bishop, and then after knight takes, queen takes, we are a pawn up with a lot of material exchanged, and they have ruined pawn structure. This is all really good. So they should actually, if we go back, sorry, after knight takes e4, the best move is, of course, bishop takes e7. And now, a very simple forced sequence. This is why this variation works. We have knight takes on c3. They're attacking our queen. Now we're attacking your queen. Bishop takes d8. Knight takes d1. Bishop takes c7, restoring material balance, preserving the bishop. And then not knight takes on b2, where you can get into a little bit of trouble, but the very precise knight e3. And on the next move, we're just going to grab the light square bishop. Both sides will have a bishop. Both sides have an equal number of pawns. It's a completely even position out of the opening, which is a great result for black. So if they figure that out, they realize, okay, e4 does not work. The next most popular try instead of 6e4 after bishop e7 is this pawn e3 move, playing more conservatively. But we've seen positions like this in the main course. At this point in time, white is not playing for an advantage, and I'd say they've really harmed themselves because they've taken away the very natural f3 square for the knight. So this is a little bit confusing, but it's actually the best move according to the engine. The engine really doesn't like play after e4. So bishop b7, bishop goes on its best square, bishop d3, and we can already play c5, trying to break down the middle. And that works here. When you break with c5 in the Nimzo-Indian or the Queen's Indian, you always have to ask, well, what happens if they push d5? But again, here we have this fantastic tactic. We can actually now play knight takes d5 with a double attack on the bishop. If the bishop takes on e7, we can take back with our knight. We're a clean pawn up and have a much better position, strategically winning. If we go back, if they take with the pawn, obviously we just take the bishop, still a pawn up. And if they take with the knight, I think you have dealer's choice. You can probably just take the bishop and the knight is hanging and has to move back. There may be other moves as well. So just a fantastic position after c5. We're getting in this desirable pawn break, again, tactically. And at this point, black is already fully equal out of the opening. There is no advantage for white. So the best engine move is knight ge2. These knights hardly inspire confidence. We can continue with knight c6, actively placing our last minor piece. This prevents white from expanding with e4 because this pawn would be loose. If they take in the middle, we'll take back with the pawn, of course, and control this very valuable center square. All we need to do now is castle, and we can look to break with d5 in the future, and black is already very slightly better. So if you own the course and you're comfortable with a lot of transpositions to a 4 knight f3 Nimzo-Indian, if you're a Queen's Indian player and you don't want to have to learn all of the theory associated with 4 bishop g5 c5, which is again the strongest move, but if you don't want to have to learn 17 lines of theory to play that variation, and you just want to get safe, comfortable, familiar positions that have that Queen's Indian type feel, I would really recommend to you at home, try this 4b6 variation. I think you'll get a lot of great results with it. So James from ChessGoals, please check out our Nimzo-Indian and Queen's Indian courses. Post your questions in the comments below, and please join our Discord where we have a thriving chess improvement community. Thanks again.